All right, let's get into the battle with Grendel. So in the end of our last reading, Beowulf has come to Hrothgar's mead hall, has introduced himself, has requested that he alone fight Grendel. And they have now, in celebration of his coming, they have had a feast, essentially, at the end. They basically threw a party. And I think this was also intentional, as we might see. Beowulf sort of plans this, right? Because Grendel comes out usually after a party because he is sort of jealous and offended by the fun that the Geats are having, because his life is so horrible and cruel, and full of trauma and all that jazz. So let's read this right here. So let's get some setup. So as I just kind of said, after the banquet, Hrothgar and his followers leave Heorot, and Beowulf and his warriors remain to spend the night. Beowulf reiterates his intent to fight Grendel without a sword. Big deal, he's going to do it barehanded. And while his followers sleep, lies waiting, eager for Grendel to appear. So little does Grendel know Beowulf is here, and he is staying awake all night waiting for Grendel to show up. So let's get into the actual poetry now of how this sort of plays out. Here we go. This is the fun part for me. Out from the marsh, from the foot of misty hills and bogs, bearing God's hatred. There's a lot of good poetry there. Hint, hint, wink, wink. Marsh, misty. That's some alliteration for you guys if you still need to finish your chart. Grendel came, hoping to kill anyone he could trap on his trip to High Heorot. High Heorot, hoping. Some H sounds there. Hint, hint, wink, wink, if you still need to fill out that chart. I won't talk about that anymore because I want to get through this, but yeah. He moved quickly through the cloudy night, up from his swampland, sliding silently toward that gold-shining hall. He had visited Hrothgar's home before, knew the way, but never, before nor after that night, found Heorot defended so firmly, his reception so harsh. He journeyed, forever joyless, straight to the door, then snapped it open, tore its iron fasteners with a touch. That's strong, right? So Grendel is powerful. And rushed angrily over the threshold. He strode quickly across the inlaid floor, snarling and fierce. His eyes gleamed in the darkness, burned with a gruesome light. Then he stopped, seeing the hall crowded with sleeping warriors, stuffed with rows of young soldiers resting together. And his heart laughed. He relished the sight, intended to tear the life from those bodies by morning. The monster's mind was hot with the thought of food and the feasting his belly would soon know. But fate, that night, intended Grendel to gnaw the broken bones of his last human supper. Well, that's a nice, little biblical metaphor. I just caught that, right? The Last Supper. Little play on words there, right? Human eyes were watching his evil steps, waiting to see his swift, hard claws. Grendel snatched at the first Geat he came to, ripped him apart, cut his body to bits with powerful jaws, drank the blood from his veins, and bolted him down, hands and feet. This is very graphic, you guys. I want you to, try and imagine this, right? This is a very brutal killing. Drinking the blood, ripping him apart with bare hands, powerful jaws. But remember, Beowulf is around, right? Death and Grendel's great teeth came together, snapping life shut. Then he stepped to another still body. So remember, he's killing people in their sleep. This is the worst thing you could maybe do. Clutched at Beowulf with his claws, grasped at a strong-hearted, wakeful sleeper, and was instantly seized himself. So he made the mistake. He done messed up. He grabbed Beowulf this time. Claws bent back as Beowulf leaned up on one arm. So he tried to grab Beowulf, and so Beowulf's just kind of like, what? you know, and like he's so strong that like it's hurting Grendel's hands just to try and grip him. That shepherd of evil, guardian of crime. Who are they talking about here? Obviously, they're talking about Grendel, right? So this is Kenning, shepherd of evil, guardian of crime. That's 2 examples in 1 line, if you need that. That shepherd of evil, guardian of crime, knew at once that nowhere on earth had he met a man whose hands were harder. His mind was flooded with fear, but nothing could take his talons and himself from that tight, hard grip. Grendel's one thought was to run from Beowulf, flee back to his marsh and hide there. This was different. This was a different Herod than the hall he had emptied. It's different because Beowulf's there this time. Like I said, Grendel done messed up. But Higlac's follower remembered his final boast, and standing erect stopped. Remember, Higlac's follower is Beowulf. So Beowulf's standing up now. He's about to like actually lay the smack down. He remembered his final boast, standing erect, stopped the monster's flight, fastened those claws in his fists till they cracked, clutched Grendel closer. So he basically is like, he's like, wait, no, you're not going anywhere. Grabs Grendel, breaks his hands just by holding them, right? And then pulls him in, clutching him closer, right? So it's almost like a bear hug, like he's going to wrestle Grendel to death. And remember, like he's going to fight and try and defeat Grendel with his bare hands and no weapons. So like this is tough. He has to fight him like a wrestler. I'm gonna scroll down a little bit so that this is easier to transition. The infamous killer fought for his freedom. So infamous killer, another Kenning, talking about Grendel. Wanting no flesh but retreat, desiring nothing but escape. His claws had been caught. He was trapped. So now the tables have turned. Grendel's like, uh-oh, I'm not hungry anymore. I'm sorry. Please don't kill me. Right? He's trying to get the heck out of there, but Beowulf won't let him go. That trip to Heorot was a miserable journey for the writhing monster. The high hall rang, its roof boards swayed, and Danes shook with terror. Down the aisles the battle swept, angry and wild. So imagine there are onlookers, right? And a lot of like anime kind of stuff still does this to this day. Whenever there's a big battle, oftentimes the story will cut the perspective to the people who are watching the battle, and like for example Dragon Ball Z does this all the time, but that's not a new thing, that's not original, right? The story of Beowulf does this all the time and does it in the next section too. But just imagine, there are these people watching the battle. It is a tough battle. They're knocking over tables, they're knocking over chairs, there's blood everywhere, and Beowulf is wrestling this demon monster from hell, this descendant from Cain, like this sinful creature, and they're wrestling together in this mead hall. Heorot trembled. The roof boards are swaying, right? They're fighting so hard that like the building itself is shaking. That's what that means when Heorot trembled. The building trembled. Heorot trembled, wonderfully built to withstand the blows, the struggling great bodies beating at its beautiful walls, shaped and fastened with iron, inside and out, artfully worked, the building stood firm. Its benches rattled, fell to the floor, gold-covered boards grating as Grendel and Beowulf battled across them. That was nice poetry there. I like that phrase. Hrothgar's wise men had fashioned Heorot to stand forever. Only fire, they had planned, could shatter what such skill had put together, swallow in hot flames such splendor of ivory and iron and wood. Suddenly, the sounds changed. We have a shift here. We're not talking about the building anymore. Suddenly, the sounds changed. The Danes started in new terror, cowering in their beds as the terrible screams of the Almighty's enemy sang in the darkness. The horrible shrieks of pain and defeat, the tears torn out of Grendel's taut throat. Hell's captive caught in the arms of him who of all the men on earth was the strongest. So, like I said, Grendel messed up. Beowulf is beating the pants off of Grendel. I'm trying not to curse here. This is really exciting. That mighty protector of men, meant to hold the monster till its life leaped out, knowing the fiend was no use to anyone in Denmark. So now we're shifting here. So we have all these kennings about the screams of the Almighty, talking about Grendel's screams of pain, right? Hell's captive, caught in the arms of him who of all men on earth was the strongest. So Grendel is Hell's captive now, right? Now we're talking about Beowulf, the mighty protector of men. That mighty of protector of men meant to hold the monster till its life leaped out. Basically saying that his intention is he's going to like death grip Grendel until Grendel is dead. That's what that sentence means, or that phrase, right? That mighty protector of men meant to hold the monster till its life leaped out. I am going to hold you until you die, which, you know, again, like when you think about how do you kill somebody or something without a weapon, the only effective way to do it really is through suffocation. So this makes a lot of sense. Knowing the fiend was no use to anyone in Denmark. All of Beowulf's band had jumped from their beds, ancestral swords raised and ready, determined to protect their prince if they could. Their courage was great, but all wasted. Basically, like, you know, his boys are there, and they got their swords, right? And they are ready, just in case something bad happens and Beowulf fails, but he doesn't, like, you know. And we appreciate them for being ready, but it's all good. They could hack at Grendel from every side, trying to open a path for his evil soul, but their points could not hurt him. The sharpest and hardest iron could not scratch at his skin, for that sin-stained demon had bewitched all men's weapons, laid spells that blunted every mortal man's blade. And yet his time had come, his days were over, his death near. So again, we're getting this idea that swords and modern technology, you know, modern for these people's time, you know, these weapons of war are useless against Grendel. And this idea kind of repeats throughout history. This is archetypal. You know, when you think of like some big monster movies, like I think of Godzilla from Japan, right? King Kong, you know, like these big monsters, like our modern technology, like our weapons are useless against them, right? And so we sort of see this paralleled throughout history. And this is like one of the first stories that does that. And so how do you defeat a monster like that? Well, you kind of, in the Godzilla movies, you need another monster, right? But in our time, we need a hero who is able to fight like a monster without becoming a monster himself. And this is a very important idea in stories. This is a very important idea when we think about heroes in general. A hero is not a nice person. A hero is a good person who could be mean when they need to be, but choose to be good even though they have the power to terrorize people. That is what a hero is. It's not a weakling. It's not like a yes person. It's not a nice person. It's a good person. And a good person can be bad sometimes if they wanted to, but they choose not to. That's what makes somebody good. All right, so anyway, let's get back to this gore fest of killing Grendel. Down to hell he would go, swept groaning and helpless to the waiting hands of still worse fiends. Now remember I told you that the actual Anglo-Saxons didn't have this same idea of heaven or hell. This is a Christian idea getting built in here, which we're going to see more of this in a second. So the Christian writers are infusing their philosophies and their ideas into this. Now he discovered, once the afflicter of men, tormentor of their days, what it meant to feud with Almighty God. Grendel saw that his strength was deserting him, his claws bound fast, Hygelac brave follower tearing at his hands. The monster's hatred rose higher, but his power had gone. It's like, fight as you may, you messed up. And so these, you know, the monks who are writing this are connecting this, you know, with like Beowulf is sort of blessed by God, and that's why he's able to defeat Grendel. But it, you know, maybe you know, it's very complicated. It's more complicated than that. He twisted in pain, and the bleeding sinews deep in his shoulders snapped. Muscle and bones split and broke. I told you this is gory, guys. You got to imagine this in your head. He twisted in pain, bleeding sinews deep in his shoulders snapped, and muscle and bone split and broke. You should be able to hear and sort of maybe even feel this if you've got a good imagination. The battle was over. Beowulf had been granted new glory. Grendel does escape, though. So this is kind of important. It's going to be more clear here in a second. But understand, Beowulf doesn't actually kill Grendel yet, but he rips his arm off. So that's what this line here about, he rips the muscle and bone split and broke. Like, he basically rips Grendel's arm off. It's not clear here. It might get clearer later, but that's what happens. And I want to make sure you know that, because it comes back later. The battle was over. Beowulf had been granted new glory. Grendel escaped, but wounded as he was, could flee to his den, his miserable hole at the bottom of the marsh, only to die, to wait for the end of all his days. So Grendel escapes, runs home, and his home is this like nasty cave pit at the bottom of a swamp or a marsh. So think of like, gray sort of Skyrim-esque worlds, right? And monsters and stuff. And so like he lives in like an underwater cave in kind of like a gray world like that. And after that bloody combat, the Danes laughed with delight. He who had come to them from across the sea, bold and strong-minded, had driven affliction off, purged Herit clean. He was happy. Now with that night's fierce work, the Danes had been served as he'd boasted he'd served them. Beowulf, a prince of the Geats, had killed Grendel, ended the grief, the sorrow, the suffering, forced on Hrothgar's helpless people by a bloodthirsty fiend. No Dane doubted the victory, for the proof, hanging high from the rafters where Beowulf had hung it, was the monster's arm, claw, and shoulder, and all. So his trophy, his proof of his victory, because again, this is a world where you need to build a reputation. How do you do it? How do you build your resume? You need proof. He has the monster's arm there for all to see. Look, I defeated this monster and I took a trophy from it to prove that I actually killed it. I think we're almost done with this section. Hope so. I gotta hurry. And then in the morning, crowds surrounded Herit, warriors coming to that hall from faraway lands, princes and leaders of men hurrying to behold the monster's great staggering tracks. They gasped with no sense of sorrow, felt no regret for his suffering, went tracing his bloody footprints, his beaten and lonely flight to the edge of the lake, where he dragged his corpse-like way, doomed and already weary of his vanishing life. So this is a very long series of two very long sentences here. Basically now, people are coming from far and wide to see this, and they are also kind of following Grendel's tracks to see where did he go, right? Is Grendel still alive? Let's double check. And so they can see that Grendel has retreated to his cave and sort of dragged himself bleeding along the way, the life sort of slowly pouring out of him as he retreats. And we get some description of the actual water in the pit itself. The water was bloody, steaming and boiling in horrible pounding waves. Heat sucked from his magic veins, but the swirling surf had covered his death. Hidden deep in murky darkness, his miserable end, as hell opened to receive him. So we have some very profound imagery here. You need to think about how this image is sort of crafted through the words themselves, right? But we have this idea of like, he went into this swamp and into the waters of it, and it almost looks like this portal to hell or something, right? Like it's like, and it's boiling, because he is like so evil, but he's also in pain. Like imagine that his blood is like so hot or something that like it makes the water boil, and it's like this disgusting color, whatever that means, and like the swirling surf had covered his death, hidden deep in murky darkness, his miserable end is hell open to receive him, right? So maybe even the heat and the steam and the murkiness is coming from the fact that a portal to hell did open, right? Like that's kind of what it's trying to make you imagine, It's trying to make you imagine like the most disgusting kind of water you can imagine. Then old and young rejoiced, turned back from that happy pilgrimage, mounted their hard-hooved horses, high-spirited stallions, and rode them slowly toward Heorot again, retelling Beowulf's bravery as they jogged along. So they kind of went to see, did Grendel die? Yes. Now we're going to come back and we're going to sing and talk about just how cool it is that Beowulf actually did this and killed Grendel. We saw it. We saw proof. Like, we saw that he we saw that he descended to hell. And over they swore that nowhere on earth or under the spreading sky or between the seas, neither south nor north, was there a warrior worthier to rule over men. But no one meant Beowulf's praise to belittle Hrothgar, their kind and gracious king. This is a very interesting parenthetical right here. But no one meant Beowulf's praise to belittle Hrothgar, their kind and gracious king. The more and more I read this, and I think I've mentioned this in a previous video, the more and more I read this, the more I start to realize and think that, like, Hrothgar is maybe like that king that, you know, you never talk bad about your king, because, like, you just can't do that in medieval or feudal times. But, like, you know how sometimes maybe you have, like, a leader and you kind of feel like, I maybe think I know more than my leader, or like I think I may be stronger than my leader, or like I kind of wish this other person would be my leader because this other person is like pretty good at what they're doing, and like this leader is kind of like but you kind of have to still be respectful of that leader, or at least feels that way. And maybe behind closed doors you kind of, you know, talk smack about that leader. You know, let's be real. I know this is real. We do this. This is human nature. Like if you've done it, you're not original, but, you know, it's real. We've all been there. Right. And so I think, you know, this is kind of one of those messages that sort of hints at that's what's going on in this world. Like some people are like, man, Beowulf just kind of showed up and killed Grendel. And for 12 years, I think it was 12 winters or something. I'd have to go back and double check the number on that. But so, you know, for many, many winters, Hrothgar has been unable to do anything about it. So very interesting parenthetical here. Makes you think about the politics of this world. And sometimes when the path ran straight and clear, they would let their horses race, red and brown and pale yellow backs streaming down the road. And sometimes a proud old soldier who had heard songs of the ancient heroes and could sing them all through, story after story, would weave a net of words for Beowulf's victory, tying the knot of his verses smoothly, swiftly into place with a poet's quick skill, singing his new song aloud while he shaped it, and the old songs as well. So again, I told you guys, in this world, it is a world of oral tradition. You need to understand that like the way that your story gets spread about is you have to do something so amazing that people will write songs about it, you know? And so Beowulf, in this instance, he has done that. He has succeeded. He has done something so amazing that the poets are inspired by him, and they travel around and they sing songs about him. You know, so he is like sort of building a reputation by getting songs written about him, which is kind of neat when you think about it. But anyway, that's the end of this. And I'm going to move on to the next thing. See you guys in class.